It's the mic. Hello, everyone. It's about 2 p.m. and we'll be getting started shortly. So we'll probably give everyone a chance to come in and we'll probably go at about 2:02 or 2:03. All right. Thank you. Hello again for those coming in. Thank you all for attending the webinar today. We'll get started in a couple more minutes just to give some more people a chance to come into the presentation. Thank you. Okay, we'll give it about one more minute and we'll kick off at 2:03 sharp. Okay, thank you all for attending the webinar today. As you can see, this is available in closed captions for any individuals who may require the service. Please see the link here, and a survey will be emailed at the end of the webinar. And please also note that the webinar is being recorded. All right. So before we get started, it is about 2:03 Eastern daylight savings time. In the chat, it's about lunchtime. So in the chat, you're going to hear me talk about subs a lot, right? You're going to hear me use the word subs a lot for subrecipients. So if you will, please just let me know your favorite sub of all time. Okay. And yes, in the DMV, we do use the word sub. All right. I'll start with myself. My favorite sub of all time is a chicken and shrimp cheesesteak. Everything on it, lettuce, tomatoes, hots, pickles. It just the works. And I would argue, I'm from Baltimore, and I would argue that Baltimore has a better cheesesteak than Philly. Any day, every day. All right. So let me see some of these subs in the chat. Hot pastrami. Ooh, that's good. Italian, chicken parm, Philly, meatball. Meatball is classic. Firehouse. Firehouse is okay. They're more branded. right? It's like a brand thing, you know. Turkey, veggie pesto, cheesesteak. Okay, club, Cuban. Someone said Thanksgiving sub from Mighty Subs. Okay, that's a good one. All right. We have, I'm not going to try to pronounce this one. Vietnamese, banh mi, but that looks good. That looks good. Hey, Russ. Italian, anything with original cheese whiz. Really? A cheese whiz sub. Okay, I think they used to do that in Philly. Italian, tuna, teriyaki. Best sub adjacent anything in Seattle. Okay. Wawa. Oh, Wawa. Boo. Classic Philly, hot Italian, Italian beef. Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. All right, I'm getting hungry again. Okay. All right. All right, that's cool. Okay, so let's get ready to dive on in. So, this is the pass-through entity's oversight responsibility for subrecipients. All right. So that's a long way of saying if you have a subrecipient, here are the rules and regulations. All right. Let's talk about it. So these are some of the topics that we will be discussing. We'll get into definitions. What is a pass-through? What is a sub? What is a contractor? We'll talk about the determination. How do you differentiate a sub from a contractor? Like, how do you know the difference? Okay. We'll get into responsibilities, right? We'll talk about requirements for pass-through entities, pre-award, post-award. We'll talk about some findings, resources, and I'll also provide my contact information. So, definitions. What is a pass-through entity? Simply put, a pass-through entity is basically a fancy way of saying a middleman, right? So you have funds that are at the federal level, or it could be from a state or another entity. But you have funds that are at the federal level. They pass down to this particular entity, and it could be a state, it could be a nonprofit, a tribe, anything like that. And then that entity passes the funds down again. So basically, funds pass through you to another entity. All right. And the same way that funds pass through you, authority passes through you as well. So, one of the key things that I want everyone to take away from this training, if you have subrecipients, think of a subrecipient as if it's your child, right? So, if it's your child, right, you have authority, and guess what? You're responsible for your child. And the original authority was kind of like grandma or grandpa, which is funny because these days they kind of the authority lowers. It's like used to be a lot more hard on me, but now you're leaning now. But anyway, so the authority flows down all the way, and you can have as many tiers of flow. Okay, so you can have a state that passed down funds to a city, the city passed down funds to a nonprofit, and on and on and on. Okay. Now, next, what is a subaward? It's an award provided by the pass-through entity to the subrecipient, right? So a subaward has to have specific information, and we'll get into that later. But the subaward is basically the contract that you use for your subrecipient, okay? Next, what is a subrecipient? This is basically the entity that receives the subaward. So in a sense, you could, as the parent organization or the pass-through organization, you receive the award, right? So I'm thinking about, let's say you're a city and you have a health department, and your health department received this award and they don't have boots on the ground. So in a sense, you pass these funds to another entity to take care of this particular service that you want to give. Okay. Feels like Jeopardy, doesn't it? What is a contract? Now, this is the legal instrument that you use for a recipient or subrecipient. okay, for procurement transactions. Now, a contract and a subaward are two different things. Use your contracts for your contractors, your subawards for your subrecipients. All right. Now, procurement, there are different rules and regulations for procurement. If you go to the CFR, those would be about 218 down to 327. So from like 218 to 27, you'll get into procurement. Now, once you get into subrecipients, that's when you get into your 330s. So about 331, 332, and the like. And what is a contractor? This is the entity that receives a contract. Okay, so simple stuff, nothing too complicated. All right, subrecipient versus contractor determination. And there is a thin line between a sub and a contractor. And even though you may have used a contract, and even though you may have used a subaward, right, we still have to determine if it's accurate. So another key thing to take away from this training is to document and show your work. Okay, document and show your work and show us how you made that conclusion, right? Because sometimes it could be judgment versus judgment. And then also sometimes you can have characteristics from both sides. So let's talk about it. So I can't sit here at this training right now and say, hey, because of this one particular thing, that is automatically a sub, or because it is one particular thing that is automatically a contractor. And again, you can have characteristics of a sub, characteristics of a contractor. Okay, so it's not always straightforward. We have to sometimes get into the weeds to figure it out. That's why we would look at the agreement and understand the relationship. Okay, the key there, what is the relationship about? And that's how we can get to the nitty gritty of, hey, which one do they fit? So the substance is more important than the form, right? So I kind of think about it as a drink, and I'm talking about ginger ale. And with the drink, the form is like the fizz at the top. Okay. But what's really important, again, I'm talking about ginger ale. And what's really important is the actual beverage. All right. So the form that can be whether it's a subaward, a contract, a MOU, memorandum of understanding, right? But the substance is the characteristics. Are there any responsibilities? Is there any authority? Okay. Is there any control? All right. And also, another thing I want to say, don't get so caught up on the terms. So if someone says they're a contractor, if someone says they're a consultant, even maybe a speaker, it would still fall into either one of those two buckets. Are you a sub or are you a contractor? Okay. Now, how you label an organization is not necessarily how we at the DOJ will label that organization. So again, document and show your work. I used to hate hearing that in third grade, but when it comes to grants, you can be 100% right, right? You can be 100% right. You checked all the boxes, you did all the things. But if you did not show your documentation, if you did not show us how you got there, then it doesn't count. You know, if it's a good movie that said it's not always what you know, it's what you can prove. All right. Extra points for who knows that movie. Is great movie. This here is what I would like to call a picture slide. All right. This is a good slide to take a picture out of. Okay. So let's start with the left side. All right. So on the left, these words are highlighted for a reason. They are not just highlighted for decoration. I like yellow. Yellow is a great color, right? So you see program, program, programmatic, program, program. Okay. So what we're saying here is they have some type of responsibility. They have some type of authority. Now at the first, determines who is eligible. You see that? Determines, this is a strong verb, determines who is eligible to receive federal assistance, right? So you have, in a sense, as a sub, the authority and responsibility to determine eligibility. I think earlier I said something about a health department. I once did a job for a city, and their health department had a grant that did transportation. It was a transportation type of grant. But the health department, they couldn't do the work themselves. So they subbed the grant out to another entity, and that entity did all the things, right? They were the ones who determined if the person was eligible. They had all the records. You could see when the person was picked up, when they was dropped off, where, the whole nine. They had all the things. We couldn't even go to the health department to get the documentation. We had to go to the particular entity. So guess what? That pushed them on the sub side, right? Let's look at the next box. Has its performance measured in relation to objectives, right? So I can think of another grant where their job was to fill bids, BED, please bear with my accent. But their job was to fill bids, and they were measured on that. So if you filled X amount of bids during the year, that would determine how much money you will receive in the future, right? And because they had that level of responsibility, right, based on what you do, you're going to get paid X on this grant, okay? That again pushed them to the sub side. So you're starting to see a common denominator here. You see responsibility, right? Authority, okay, is responsible again for programmatic requirements, right? That pushes you to the sub side. Now, if you look into this last box, that's a fancy way of saying a type of nonprofit. And when I say nonprofit, I mean higher education, state and local government, tribal organization, or nonprofit. Generally, subs are one of those four, generally. Okay, now it's not to say a sub can't be a for-profit entity or person. However, generally is one of the big four. Okay, all right. Now, if you look to the right on the contractor side, I like to call this the yellow pages section. Okay, so for some, I think we may have some Gen Z here. You might not have never seen the yellow page in your life, right? But when we had the yellow pages, these are the things that we used to see. So let's talk about it. Provides goods and services within normal business operations. You know, from 9 to 5, you can get this thing. Okay, similar goods and services to many different purchasers. So this kind of flows into competition, right? You can get a carpenter, you can get a plumber, you can get what's another example? Someone to work on your building, right? A handyman, so to speak. It's more competitive to get those things, and you have a ton of options. But if you look on a sub, you might not have a ton of options for a subrecipient. Okay, that's another reason why a sub doesn't necessarily have sole source rules, but a contractor does. Okay, so that's a tidbit, right? It's nothing that says that a sub can't be a sole source, but a contractor, it's a lot of rules and regulations for a contractor to be a sole source, right? And in this next box, I like this word. This is a good Jeopardy. I mean, not Jeopardy, it's Scrabble word. I would use this. I'm going to use this on Scrabble one day. Ancillary, right? Ancillary. So for my accountants, think about programmatic expenses and think about operating expenses. So for a contract, right, or contractor, consultant, or whatever we want to use, it would be things that keep the lights on. Okay, so whether it's office equipment, supplies, software, licenses, but not necessarily things for the program. Okay, and then last but not least, earns a profit. A contractor can build a profit until they contract, and that's a-okay, that's fine, right? A subrecipient can't necessarily do that. 9 times out of 10, they cannot do that. Now, there's a 1 out of 10, but we're not going to get into that. But 9 times out of 10, that is 100% unallowable. All right. So look, I come with gifts. Let me show you a way to show your work. All right. 1 second. Stop sharing for a quick tidbit. And I want to show you how this would look. Okay, so can you see my screen okay? Give me a thumbs up. Let me see. Now I can. Okay, yes, good. Yes, yes. All right, great, 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 great. So here's an example of showing your work. right? You can see, and we have this document on our website. If you go to ojp.gov/training, you can find it. It's a little dated. We're working on fixing it. Okay. It's a little dated, but it still works in this capacity. So in the subrecipient section, look at the boxes. May determine who is eligible, and it gives examples: a sub that identifies mentors, performance measures, responsibility for decision making, right? It uses federal funds, basically a nonprofit. It won't earn a profit and required to make a match or in-kind support, right? So you see these 6 boxes on this side. Then we go to the bottom: provides goods and services within normal business operations, competitive environment. So simply put, if you're checking more boxes on one section versus the other section, guess what? You showed your work, you have documentation, you showed your work, you have documentation, and I'll even take it another level, have one person prepare this document and then have someone, and whether it's a supervisor or executive director, come back and sign off on it. So one person prepared it, someone else reviewed it, right? So now you have controls. Okay. That'll help you out in a single audit too, because it's all about controls and documentation. If you have controls, you show that someone signed off, and then you have documentation, 90% of your work in grants is done. All right. So here's an example. Any questions? I want to pause for a sec. Any questions on this? Any questions? And please let me know if I'm moving too fast. Any questions? Someone says, I got on late. Well, you was late. I'm not supposed to help. Just messing. If you go to the ojp.gov/training website, you can find a copy of it. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, cool. So let me go back to the presentation. Give me one sec. Okay, so we're back. Now let's talk about responsibilities. Please be responsible for your children. Remember, treat a subrecipient like it's your child. Why? Because at the end of the day, you are responsible for your children. Okay. And contracting, I kind of see that like babysitting. Yes, you have a high level of authority, right? You have a lot of the same, but it's not at the same level. Okay. So, responsibilities. You want to ensure the subrecipients use grant funds in accordance with the program. Okay. Oversee the day-to-day operations. Don't just wait for a reimbursement request and that's when you look at your sub, right? Make sure you know what's going on. You know, it used to be a commercial that came on years ago, and it said it's 11 p.m. Do you know where your child is? Well, you just gave this entity $300,000. Do you know where your money is? Okay. So next, this is where, going back to the child analogy, we want to start thinking about report cards and projects. Your sub has report cards and your sub has projects, right? What are the projects? They have FFRs, programmatic reports. Those have to be submitted right, and those have to be submitted on time. And the onus is on the parent to make sure that that happens. Okay. And let's say they get a report card. What are the report cards? They may get audited. Okay. They may be monitored, or they may receive some type of thing from a federal agency, or maybe even a state agency, right? And the onus is on the parent to make sure that the appropriate actions happen to get that sub back on track. All right. So we want to read the comments. If your subrecipient has a single audit, did you look at the comments? Right? What was the finding? What was the condition of the finding? What had happened? Okay. And what can you do to help them get back to where they need to be? Okay. The use of subs does not relieve you of responsibility, right? Take care of your kids. Know what's going on with your kids. So let's get into the pre-award process. Pre-award. Okay, first thing, policies and procedures, right? And please bear with me. I can preach sometimes, so I'm about to preach a little bit. Have a policy, have a procedure, not just in a sense for subs, but just all across the board. You know, every office generally has a person who likes to do the most and generally has a person who likes to do the least, right? We got our lazies and we have our overachievers, right? And sometimes they're both right. But if you have a process, if you have a policy, procedures with controls, right, then it's our method of doing things. This is the manual. And I cannot tell you how many offices over the years, I've been doing this since 2012, how many offices I've been to over the years where the executive director retired. He was there for 30 years, retired. And when he left, he took everything with him. And then the next person comes in and they're starting from scratch. I can tell you about a job. This lady, she didn't know what she had to do until we came in to do the job. And we're giving her all these findings and she's basically learning as she went, but we still had to write it up in a report, right? But if there was a manual, a set standard, that would have never happened. So have a policy, have procedures, all right? That's my TED talk. Okay. So anyway, as a pass through, and it should be in writing, right? In writing, like make sure it's in writing. It's not what's in this person's head and that person's head. Because if you all win the lottery, the office, offices do a lottery polls. If you all win, does the office crash and burn that? Okay. So have a set policy and procedure from the beginning to the end, right? So from how you bring a sub in to how you monitor your sub, to how you close out, and if there are any disciplinary actions that have to take place, right? Have a policy over the whole nine, okay? Must. When we talk about grants, anytime you see must, right, you want your eyes and your ears to perk up a little bit. If you see should, that means you get a little more leeway, but must, do not pass go. You must do this thing, okay? So you must decide upon the appropriate instrument that you're going to use, whether it's an MOU, contract, subaward, etc. Have a method for how you put it out into the atmosphere. How do you do your requests for bids? Okay, your invitations for proposals. How does it done? All right. Have a process for reviewing eligibility. Okay, and sometimes you can include that criteria in the application. And it's good to have that written because let's say if a question of fairness that came up, you picked them, why didn't you pick me? You can sit back and say, hey, and the lawyers get involved. You can sit back and say, hey, this is our process, this is our procedure, this is what had happened or what did not happen, right? We just stuck to the script, okay? So next, it used to be kind of inexplicit, but now it's explicitly stated when we had the 2 CFR update that came out in 2024 that you have to verify subs are not suspended or debarred. Okay, so that's a must now. And not only that, you also want it documented. Okay, so really quick, let me show you how to do that real fast. Real fast. Give me 1 second. Go to the website. Oh, wrong one. Excuse me. Okay, let me go here. All right, you should all be able to see my screen. So if you go to the sam.gov website, this is where you go to see if an entity is suspended or debarred. All right, so I'm going to put my name here. Here's my name. Well, let me capitalize my first name. And we do a search. Boom. Guess what? No matches found. Okay, I am not suspended or debarred. Now here, what you can do is take a screenshot and put it into your subrecipients file. And you can do the same thing with your contractors. Screenshot it, put it into the file. Now you have evidence. Because if we did an audit or we did a monitoring, and we're looking for evidence and you just telling me or telling the team that you did it, how can you prove that, right? But if you have this screenshot and you see it took me 30 seconds. If you have this screenshot it, you showed your work. You have your documentation. Okay, checkbox. All right, now let me go back. And then next, well, and I'm about to come back out again. I'm going to show you something else. You want to ensure that every subaward is clearly identified as a subaward to the subrecipient. It includes, let's start with the first one, federal award information. What does that mean? What is federal award information? Okay, let me stop sharing again. Let me show you. Let me show you. So this is directly from, okay, everyone can see my screen. This is directly from the CFR. So if you go to ecfr.gov, right, it's directly from the source. This isn't coming from me. This is the regulation. Federal award identification. So when I would design test sheets for my staff, I would literally copy and paste these different bullets, right? So it's about 12, 13, 14 bullets, copy and paste. And I would tell the staff, look at the contract. Either you see it or you don't. If you see it, put a check. If you don't, put an X, right? So, subrecipient's name, the UEI, the federal award identification number, the date, period of performance, amount of funds obligated, period of performance. Yeah, we just said that. Okay, for any FAFADA information, the federal agency, pass-through entity, contact information for the official of the pass-through entity. Okay, the assistant listing number, also known as the CFDA. All right, is it for research and development? What's the indirect cost rate? Okay, all these things should be in that subaward. All right, so let me give you an example of a sheet that has this. I'll give you an example. Remember, I come with gifts. I'm not just going to talk to you. I come with gifts. So here's an example of a cover sheet. So if you look at this cover sheet, it has all the things. You can see the sub name, right? The prime recipient name, program type, solicitation title, the award, the period of performance, what's the subaward number? What's the amount? Okay, the budget. Is there any match? UEI, the grant number, assistance listing number, okay, required match, match rate, indirect cost rate. Okay, you see dates again, period of performance again. Go to the next page. Who's the authorized rep from the federal government? What's their title, phone number, email? Okay, who's the federal award agency? Research and development. You see all the things in a cover sheet. In a quick 2-page cover sheet, you saved yourself some findings. Okay, and I'm gonna give you an example of an entity that received findings for things like this, and it could have been covered. How long would this have taken? Okay. So I know I said a lot, so I want to pause for a second and go back to the chat. Any questions on this? Any questions so far?
Trey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First question. I'm trying to keep notes and keep up. Oh, that is a PowerPoint also available. Would you use the domain on SAM, or there is one that says exclusion?
Hold up. Ask that. Let me read it. Would you
It
use
said the domain on SAM, or is there one that says exclusion?
Oh, just look at them all. So you don't necessarily have to use domain. It's one that lets you pretty much pick all of them, right? So in all the boxes or any of the boxes, you can pretty much get that. And I see more questions coming in about the cover sheet. It's not officialized yet. Okay, it's not official yet. Some people still want to double check and triple check, so we're waiting for management to finish with it. But it's an example. As soon as it's ready, it'll be on the ojp.gov training website.
The next question is based on 25.100 and 25.105. Tier 2 subrecipients do not have to have an UEI in SAM. How do you check for debarment of that entity?
All right, give me 1 second. Let me read that question. I hear you talking, but I'm more of a visual person. Let me move this thing over here. Let me back up. Let me read that question for a second. Ooh. based on 25-100. Tier 2 subs do not have to have a UEI in SAM. How do you check for debarment of that entity? Even if you don't have a UEI, you may still be in SAM. SAM is the way that we check for suspension and debarment. Okay, so if it's not in SAM, if it don't apply, let it fly. Okay. And Crystal, I can see the questions. Let me go through them. Can we get a copy of this form? We're working on that. Can you just attach the award letter with budget and special conditions as a schedule to the sub? If it's part of the contract, then that's fine. Like if it's an exhibit, because this is a cover sheet can act as an exhibit too. So if it's a part of the contract, fine. But don't look at it like this is a separate attachment that wasn't with the contract, because the entity needs to know this information too. Your pass-through entity needs to know that information. I can't tell you how many states have received federal funds, passed those funds, put those funds down to a city or a county government, and the county government doesn't even know that they're federal monies, right? So you want to make sure that that information is in the contract. And I'm gonna give you an example of a state about that too. Someone said, I thought it was a gift. It is a gift, but the gift isn't ready. I got to wait till it's ready. So once I get the green light to pass it on, I'll pass it on. Can we use it while in review so we are in compliance, or do you suggest something we can use? You can use anything you like, right? The key is to just make sure if you go to 2 CFR, and you can see it at the bottom, 332A and B, just make sure your subaward has that language or has that information. Okay. We don't necessarily tell you how to do it. We just make sure that you did. All right. What happens if a grantee is debarred or SAM.gov registration during the sub-grant award period? Now, if they're debarred, you know the rules. They're not supposed to receive federal grant monies. So you definitely want to talk to your program manager, grant manager, and you may have to pretty much cancel the award. Okay. Should a sub maintain an active UEI? Yes, a sub should definitely maintain a UEI. Okay. Now, any other questions? Anyone else? Okay. Okay, cool. So now we've stopped at federal award information. So of course you need the requirements of the subaward. Sometimes there are additional requirements, certain certifications that need to be made. What's the indirect cost rate? Access, right? What does that mean? What is an access requirement, right? So going back to the child analogy, I used to come home from school and my entire room was like revamped. Like mom took the bed from here, she put that over there, the dresser changed. I had an old system, and my system was just thrown to shambles. As the parent organization, you have similar authority. So you have access to look at all the files, documentation, and grandma, the federal government too, has the authority to look at all the documentation and information regarding the subaward. So you can look under their bed, you can look under the mattress, you can look in the closet, you can find the stash spots. You have that authority. And it's important that you have that in the contract so that they know, okay? And then, of course, if you have any closed out terms and conditions, you want that as well. Okay. Next, risk assessment. Risk assessment. So a pass-through entity should perform a risk assessment. Now, the CFR doesn't tell you when to do the risk assessment. It just tells you got to do it, right? However, before you give someone some money, I highly recommend that is when you assess the risk. Don't wait till after you give them some money to assess the risk. Do it before the fact, okay? Now, a new rule that came in is fraud. So the update that came October 1st, 2024, added the stipulation that you also have to evaluate fraud risk. So you need to evaluate fraud risk as well as risk of non-compliance, all right? Now, It's a lot of different ways that you can do that. You can come up with a system that works for you. If any of you all have been to our advanced training, we give you our system to how we do a risk assessment. And it's basically a scale, and we come up with a score, the whole nine, right? But the main things that you want to consider: the subs experience with the same or similar awards, if they had any audits, any monitorings, okay, do they have new personnel, right? I told you about the executive director that retired, okay, do they have a new system? Maybe they're going from SAP to Workday, and Workday is supposed to save D-Day, but Workday is a mess, okay? And then, of course, again, any monitoring that we may have done. All right. Now, based on this risk assessment, you can determine how much you're going to monitor and if you want to add any terms and conditions. So let me give you a real world example. My oldest daughter is 17. She wants to drive. Okay. And it's funny, mom is quiet now. Why can't she drive your car? Why she got to drive my car? But anyway, she wants to drive. So I'm doing a risk assessment. Now, I know you. I was there when you were born. I've been there your whole life. So I understand the risk. Okay. And it's either high, we can do all the score, but we want to break it down as a high, medium, or low. Say it's about a medium risk, but I'm going to add some terms and conditions. Your little sister can't drive with you. Some of your friends can't drive with you. Keep your location on at all times, right? And I want gas in my vehicle. Okay. Now, based on this risk assessment, guess what I did? I put the terms and conditions, and I also know how I'm going to monitor. Okay. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about the risk assessment a little more deeper. Now, you use this, and I just said it, to determine the appropriate level of monitoring, right? And you can have a scoring system that works for you. And it's no right or wrong answer. Just document and show your work. Okay, you can come up with a scoring mechanism, whatever you want, but document it and show your work, right? And the final score, we should clearly identify if it's high, medium, or low. Okay. So here's an example. All risk factors are not created equally, right? Some risk factors are higher and lower than others, right? So we have confidential petty cash. We have that as a 3, okay? And then we have the subaward amount, which would probably be a 3 to me, but this is for the sake of this training, is at a 1, okay? Delinquent reports, we put that as a 2, right? So now you have the first number. Okay, is the risk factor a 1, 2, or 3? Now from there, you can say or assess, is this particular risk factor a high, a medium, or low? Okay, so let's say you got 2 3s. It's a 3 type of level, and you assess the risk as a 3. So now you do math, you multiply. 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, now based on this, you go through all your risk factors and you come up with a score. And in that score, you can determine, hey, high, medium, low risk. And in our advanced training, we give you a detailed assessment of how we do this. So some other things to think about. Hey, what was the award amount? We said that one. Do they have any matching funds? Are they a new subrecipient? Is this the first time they've ever been a sub? Okay. Have they sent you a ton of budget modifications? Is every other week you're getting a budget mod? Like, okay, you might be more risky. Have they been suspended or debarred in the past? Do they owe any monies to the federal government? All right. Projects. Have their projects been late? The FFRs, programmatic reports, have they been done correctly? Okay. Report cards. Have they had a modified audit opinion? A modified audit opinion is not a good thing. Has it been adverse? Has it been disclaimed? Okay. Have they been monitored by the DOJ? And in our report, we gave them a ton of technical assistance. All right. So you want to look at these things and come up with your system. Again, it's not necessarily an exact way to do this, right? It's what works for you, right? We don't control your hows. We just tell you what. All right. Now, the assessment of these attributes, this is how you come up with your monitoring plan. Okay. And with your monitoring plan, you want to have different levels of monitoring based on the risk. So if they're high risk, you're going to monitor more, or you're going to monitor more detailed. If they're medium, it'll be in the middle. And if they're low, it'll be low. We ask you to have policies and procedures around this process and make sure your policies and procedures mirror what you do, right? What I mean by this, if they're high risk, I shouldn't see a low risk monitoring plan. If they're a low risk, I shouldn't see a high risk monitoring plan. Okay, make it make sense. Now, monitoring, yes, monitor your children, know what's going on. All right, you assess the risks. Now it's time to watch them. Watch your kids. Just don't send them to grandma or send them to daycare. All right, you need to watch them too. So you must, getting back, projects report cards, review their projects, their financial and performance reports, make sure they're done right, make sure they're done on time. Okay, now the rest deals with the report cards. All right, if they had any findings, okay, any technical assistance, any management decisions, right, make sure that they do what they say they're going to do on time. Okay, and the issue is fixed. All right, I can tell you a story where I know of an entity. It was like a large nonprofit, and we had did the job for like a few years in a row. And we kept, and every time we came to do the job, we asked to see the single audit for one of the subs. So we looked at the single audit and we kept seeing the same finding. For about 3 years straight, we saw the same finding. And we asked them, hey, what did you do about this finding? You know, and they gave us the Scooby-Doo. We gave them a finding for that, right? As the parent organization, you have to ensure your subrecipient takes corrective action, okay? Or you get a finding, all right? So have a plan, have an annual monitoring plan, okay? Show all the subs you're going to monitor, right? And everyone from every risk should be monitored, whether it's high, medium, or low, okay? So if it's a low risk procedure, you can do low risk things. Maybe you just, hey, did you do your projects on time? Show me your audit, your single audit. Is everything working with the grant? You're achieving objectives, check some boxes. Okay, boom, we're done. Okay, and if they're high risk, maybe you're going to come on site. We're going to do an in-depth monitoring, all right? Because you're high risk. It is what it is, okay? So you want to have certain objectives on your plan, right? Here are some examples. Are they carrying out the program as stipulated in the award? Okay. Do they have adequate internal controls? And this is a risk factor in itself, because let's say you're doing bank reconciliation, but no one's signing off on the bank rec. All right, that's risky, right? Or if do they have policies and procedures? What controls do they have over the grant? All right. Make sure that they're claiming reimbursement for costs that are allowable, reasonable, allocable, necessary. Identify any conflicts of interest, and of course, documentation. Show your work, document, show your work. Because if they're asking you, they sent you a reimbursement for $100,000, but they don't have any receipts, they don't have any timesheets, they have none of the things. What sense does it make for you to reimburse them? Okay. Now you can have your process. Maybe it's on budget. I'm not saying that you have to audit every single reimbursement request, but you do want to make sure that they have documentation and they're doing what they're supposed to do. Again, it's not always what you know, it's what you can prove. So if this looks familiar, where I'm about to go with this now is because this is what we do. All right. So if we have, or if we're doing an in-depth monitoring, these are some of the best practices that we practice. Okay. And what I like to say is, or I tell to my staff at self-esteem, give people a chance. We're not looking to catch you. We're not looking to ding you. We don't want to be in the way. Okay, you have a job, you're providing this particular service. We want you to achieve the things that you're supposed to achieve with the grant. Okay, but we need to come in and check our boxes to make sure that everything is running smooth. All right, now there are some things that we can do on our own. Okay, some of the things that we can do on our own, we can look at the application, we can check the written agreement, we can look at the financial and progress reports, drawdowns, the single audit is public information. We can go to the Federal Clearinghouse and review it on our own. We don't necessarily need to ask for these things, okay? So you can do a preliminary review, all right? So best practices. Again, if it looks familiar, please feel free to plagiarize because this is what we do. You can use it, right? We're kind of like grandma or grandpa. You can do some of the things, well, not all the things, because grandma was vicious in the 80s, let me tell you. You know, she bowed it out now, but, you know, back in 92, 93, you was a little bit different, mom. But anyway, so you can follow these particular practices, all right? So let's dive in. So the first, notification. Again, give people a chance. You're not looking to catch them. You're not looking to ding them. All right, so send a notification letter, a formal letter, at least several weeks before you want to come out, right? So make sure that the dates work, okay? You can send a PBC list. Here's some of the things that we're going to be looking for. If you want to make samples or you want their general ledger or you want to know who's the payroll on the grant, you can ask for some of the documentation in advance. Okay, make sure that the people that you want to talk to are available. It might not be a good idea to do a site visit and the controller is on vacation or the executive director is doing a site visit in another state. Okay, so make sure that the powers that be are available. All right. Next, the entrance. This is what I like to call setting the table. We are setting the table. Okay, so we're going to talk about past, we're going to talk about the present, and we're going to talk about the future, okay? And when it comes to the present, this is where sometimes, me personally, I like to see if I'm going to have any findings in advance. So I told you about some new rules that came. Now you have to check sam.gov for a suspension or debarment. Well, I may ask a question, hey, have you been checking sam.gov for suspension or debarment? Do you have the documentation on that? Or hey, have you been doing the fraud risk assessment? Do you have any documentation on that? If the answer is no, I already know it's a finding. All right. So here we want to set the table. This is the purpose. Here's the scope. These are the things we need. Here's the schedule. Okay. Next up, field work. We're in the field. We're on site. Okay. So now that we're on site, we're looking at all the documents. We're talking to all the people. A few rules. Don't ask for the same thing twice. Okay, if you ask for it once and they gave it to you, don't ask for it again. All right, get it right the first time. Another rule, do not bombard with questions. They still have a job to do. Do not be in the way. Okay, so I like to have a PBC list, or not a PBC list, a open items list. And in that open items list, these are all the things that are open. I will send it in the beginning of the day, maybe at lunch, and at the end of the day. There are no surprises. You know I asked for this thing. You know that the date, and I have the dates on there too. Date requested. Date requested. You know I asked for this thing on this date, right? So if I write you up because I didn't get this thing, you already know why. There are no surprises, okay? Next up, the exit. So we set the table. Now let's clear the table. All right, we're going to talk about everything that went well. Okay, we're not just here to ding you and bop you on the head for all the things that didn't happen. Okay, we come in peace. All right, and you can also give the sub the opportunity to correct any issues, right? And you'll be surprised how miraculously during an exit conference that things end up coming up. Oh, you finally found that thing now, huh? Okay, peace. You found it. All right, I'm not going to ding you over the head. All right, as long as you're not insulting my intelligence, but I'm not going to ding you over the head. Okay. Now, if we can't solve it by the exit, you remember there were no surprises. Was no surprises. You knew what was missing. You knew what was open. You knew the issue. Okay. Now we can clear it out. And if we couldn't clear it out, hey, you know I'm going to write you up. I got to do it. Write you up. That was fair. Okay. Now we have a follow-up letter. This is where we create the permanent record. All right. So we'll talk about any successes. We'll clearly describe any deficiencies, recommendations, okay, deadlines. So a corrective action plan, it has to have certain elements. If you go to 2 CFR 200, I want to say 465 or somewhere around that range, it'll tell you what a corrective action plan should have. So it generally have the contact person, the time frame, what was the recommendation, and then what you're going to do to fix it. All right. So it should have all those things. And as a parent organization, if you look at the cap, you should be able to say, hey, you said you was going to fix this by this particular date. Did you fix it? What happened? Why? All right. And then, okay, we just talked about the cap. We'll have the cap done, right? And last but not least, close out. Everything is done. What was solved was solved. What was not was not. I'll see you next time. Okay. Simple enough, right? So let me pause for a second. Any questions on this? Any questions? Check the chat. Any questions? Someone said, how often do we check for a suspension and debarment? It's nothing in the CFR that tells you how often. Okay. However, as a best practice, I would recommend at least quarterly because things can happen. I know of some entities that have done it monthly. Okay. But as far as documentation, you should at least do it once before you do the award, right? And then after that, have a policy and procedure that works for your particular entity. Okay. Any other questions on this? Okay, cool. All right, keep going.
Trey, that was a question. Should a subrecipient maintain an active UEI registration in SAM.gov for the entire award period?
I'm sorry, I thought I answered that earlier. Yes, you should definitely keep a UEI. Keep a UEI at all times. Like, there's no reason why you should, especially as a sub, there's no reason why you shouldn't have a UEI. So keep your UEI. Someone said, if there is a deficiency to cure, what is a reasonable time frame to give them? What do you mean by cure? You mean to fix the finding? Okay, so it depends. It really depends on what is the finding. Okay, what is the finding? What happened? Like, for example, maybe they don't have adequate policies and procedures or something like that. It's hard to tell an entity 30 days to fix the finding, or 30 days to create an entire manual with policies and procedures around the whole thing, right? So in a sense, it really depends. So that's on a case-by-case basis. Now, generally, a monitoring or an audit or something like that is a yearly type of issue. So you might just give them, hey, until the next time you come out. But again, it really depends on what was the thing. Or maybe it wasn't documentation. Let's say you did a test on an expenditure and they couldn't find the documentation for the expenditure. They might not ever be able to come up with a reasonable time frame to fix that finding. Right? Or the recommendation might be, hey, beef up your policies and procedures again. So it all depends. Anyone else? Okay, cool. So now let's talk about remedies. So let's say, hey, you keep seeing a bad report card. All right. They're not getting their projects done on time. Okay. You done went in and you did the monitoring. They had a cap. They didn't even do what was supposed to do in the cap. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. What do I do? You are allowed to discipline your child. Okay. As a child of the 80s and 90s, you were spanked. You can spank when it comes to grants. All right. Excuse the term. Please excuse the term. I'm just joking. Please excuse me. Okay. But there are remedies for noncompliance. So it is the onus upon the pass-through entity to make sure that the sub follows all the rules. Federal rules, state rules, term conditions of the award. The onus is upon you. Okay. Here are some of the things that you can do. You can withhold payments until the subrecipient takes corrective action. You can disallow costs for all or part of the activity associated with noncompliance. You can partly or wholly suspend or terminate the award. You can initiate the suspension and debarment process. You can withhold future subawards, or you can pursue other legal remedies. We're getting the lawyers involved. And with the new rules, it's a new CFR that's working its way through. It's not official yet, and it's supposed to come out the beginning of October, but the red line version is giving entities a lot more leeway to terminate awards. Okay, so there's going to be a lot more leeway if it goes past, because it may be some legal challenges there. So we're not, I think someone had asked, are we going to do a training on that? Not just yet, because we need to see what's going to be final. Okay. But anyway, there are remedies for non-compliance. All right. There are things that you can do. Okay. So closeout, post award. Let's get into post award. How we looking on time? Okay, we'll be wrapping up soon. I know it's supposed to be an hour. We're wrapping up soon, okay? So closeout. Now the closeout rules are identical, okay, to the parent organization. The biggest difference is timing, all right? A direct recipient of federal grant funds is given 120 days to close out. For a subrecipient, it's 90. Everything must be liquidated. Everything must be done. Okay. Now, during closeout, and closeout is basically the period after the period of performance. During closeout, you can charge things to a grant. That's allowable. Okay. So let's say you have someone that's working on the final FFR. If you're working on the final FFR, you can charge that time to the grant. I can think of a job I did, and it was at a university, and they had this highly technical piece of equipment. And this highly technical piece of equipment that had like 18 syllables, no exaggeration, in its name, it became obsolete at the end of the period of performance. But now, since it was obsolete, it was a disposal process. And since they had disposed it, it was disposal costs associated. Guess what? You can charge that to the grant. Just make sure it's on the budget, but it's allowable to be charged into the grant. Now, after the closeout period, after that 90 days, nothing else. That's it. Okay. And again, have policies and procedures around all these things, right? So when it came to the remedies, have policies on that, closeout, policies on that. Remember what we said earlier, from the beginning, inception, to monitoring, all the way to the end. All right. More requirements. As a pass-through entity, do not delay payments. If they did everything that they were supposed to do, it's allowable, it's reasonable, it's in a budget, give them money. All right. If there's any excess cash, make sure it's refunded. If you have to make any adjustments to the FFRs, make your adjustments, right? And make sure you account for any property acquired or equipment acquired with federal funds. And, you know, with federal funding used for equipment or property, anything like that, remember certain rules that you have to know, like what was the cost, what's the depreciation, what's the serial number, okay, a description of, okay, so all of those things should be noted. FAFATA, this is another picture slide. FAFATA is important. This is the Federal Funding Accountability and Transparency Act. All right. Now, this only applies to prime recipients. So pop quiz really quick in the chat. What is a prime recipient? Really quick. What does that mean? What's a prime recipient? Someone said, what is the CFR number? Which CFR number are you talking about? But back to my question, what is a prime recipient? It could be, not necessarily a contractor, but it could be. It could be a pass-through entity. The main awardee. I can go with that. The main award, this is even better. Someone said it's the one that gets the direct award from the federal. Yes, a prime recipient is a direct recipient of federal grant funds. You are the one that got the money from the feds. Okay, this only applies to you. All right. So if you were a second tier, let's say the feds gave the money to a state and the state gave the money to your nonprofit, In that case, you're a second tier and you're off the hook for the FFATA. This only applies to prime recipients. And also, if your gross revenue is less than 300,000, you are exempt as well. All right. So this is also, again, a good picture slide. What this is saying, once you have a subrecipient and you sign the contract, and that contract crosses the 30K threshold, you must report that in the system. Okay. And that's sam.gov/FSRS. FSRS used to have its own website. Now it's under SAM now. All right. So you have to report it. And it literally takes about 5 minutes. So you just saying, what's the subaward number, who's the sub, how much it is, a little more information, boom, you're done. Okay. Now, outside of that, if the entity receives 80% or more of its gross revenue in federal awards, and that number is greater than 25 million, the executive compensation also has to be disclosed. Okay. Timing. Look at it like this. Let's say, and it's not about when you spent the money, it's when you signed the contract. Let's say you signed the contract. Today is the 4th. Today is August 4th. You have until the end of the next month to report it in the system. I'm going to say that again. Today is August 4th. You signed the contract, or let's say you already had a contract. It was 20,000 and it went up 10. Now it's 30. You have until September 30th to report it in the system. Okay. So you have until the end of the following month. In a sense, you have 2 months to report. So 2 months for 5 minutes. All right. Think about it like that. And here's the website again, sam.gov/FSRS. They used to have their own website. Now they're under SAM. Okay. So here are a couple tips. Every subaward gets its own home, right? My analogy is every baby get a bed. Right. So every subaward gets its own report. It's not about the entity, because an entity can have multiple subawards. I once gave an entity a finding because I looked up this. When I did selections for subrecipients, I went by the subaward. And because that's how you go. I go by subaward. And the entity, I found some of their subawards in a FFATA system, but the one in particular that I was looking for, I didn't see. And that's a finding. Right. So every subaward gets its own report, but you only need to report the subaward once. So you report the subaward once, and then from there, you just update it. So if anything changed, if you need to make a modification, if it went up, if it went down, that's all you have to do. Okay. You just need to adjust it. All right. So now let's talk about findings. And in fact, I want to show you some findings before I get into these. Let me give you an example of some of the findings. Is FFATA required if the subrecipient is another state entity? Yes. If you're a state, yes, FFATA is required. But it depends where you receive the money from. Okay. So if it's federal money and you receive those monies direct, because a state may not be a first tier. Okay, you might have received it from, let's say, a university that's part of the state, and you received the monies from the state, and the state got the money from the feds, then you might not be the first tier. So it's all about prime and direct. Okay, so don't think about the type of entity. Just think if you're a prime recipient. Okay, so here I want to give you some examples of an actual finding. And I'm not picking on anyone. I'm not picking on anyone. I chose this entity, and it's a state actually. I chose the state of Maryland because I'm from Maryland. I'm also a Maryland resident. All right. But here's I'm not picking on you. If anyone is from the state of Maryland, I'm not picking on you. Okay. It's my home state. I'm in DC and Maryland is right there. Okay. So anyway, here is material weakness. This is their finding. And this is recent. This is 2025. 8 out of 11 subs selected had no proof of monitoring procedures finding. Okay. 8 out of 11. And this is a state. Okay. So don't just depend on the state. All right. And you see, this is the language that you have to have in the finding, condition, criteria. Let's look at another one. Sufficient deficiency in internal controls and non-compliance over subrecipient monitoring. Look at this. 25 out of 25 subs selected for testing, they did not have the federal award identification number, and they didn't have the UEI. UEIs matter, okay? 1 out of 25, no evidence that they verified the UEI. 11 out of 25, no evidence of a risk assessment. Look, 1 out of 25, the single audit report identified findings, and DACD did not have evidence of any follow-up. You see those keywords? Evidence. They can't see it. They might have said that they did it, but they couldn't see it. We got to see it to believe it. See? Look at all these things. So this is a real thing. You can avoid these findings. Here's more. Again, 5 out of 5, verification of UEI was not performed timely, and the UEI was not included in the subaward. Entities are checking for this. This is being checked for, okay? So that's a quick example. So I come with gifts. I can't always give the gift, but I can at least show it, okay? Okay, so we go back to the presentation. So here are some recurring findings. So we're seeing that pass-through entities are not establishing policies and procedures. We need the policy. Ensuring subrecipient monitoring procedures are adequate. Adequately monitoring subs to provide reasonable assurance that they comply with the award. Ensuring resources are available to provide monitoring. They're not training their staff. They're not making sure that the entities comply with the single audit. You have 9 months after the end of the year to get your single audit done, all right? Now, the threshold for the single audit did increase. It used to be $750,000. After October 1st, 2024, went up to 1 million. And then also we're seeing that entities are not meeting the FFADA. So you're not getting your FFADA done, or it's not done on time, okay? All right, so we're about to wrapping up soon. Rest assured, there are resources. We have the 2 CFR 200. Okay, I make mistakes. All right, so if I make a mistake, I am sorry. Okay, but go to the source. This is the gospel. Go to the regulation. Okay, we have the DOJ grant financial guide. We have a procurement guide. There's the standards for internal control in the federal government, also known as the Green Book. And the Green Book is based on COSO, the internal control framework. Okay, so use your resources. Now, specific resources for OJP, we have some toolkits. Again, if you go to ojp.gov/training, you can check out toolkits. We have some things that we can give. Like, for example, here's the subaward procurement toolkit. It's really helpful. Non-competitive procurement, states and tribes. You have to follow your own procurement policies and procedures. It used to just be states, but 10.124 tribal organizations were allowed to, so you can use your own policies and procedures, right? Look out for sole source. Okay, there are rules and regulations around sole source, but you got to document it too. Okay, document, show your work. All right. Now, sole source approval required by OJP. So once you cross the simplified acquisition threshold, which is 350K, you got to get the green light from us, right? So make sure that you get your green light is in the presence of a GAM. So get your approval. Okay. And then we have a sole source review checklist. Check that out. We also have some previous webinar recordings. Okay, so you can go on the training website and check some of those out. Hey, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay, so just a super brief introduction. My name is Trayvon Tillman. I'm a CPA, certified public accountant, CFE, certified fraud examiner. I'm licensed in the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. My background is audits. I started back in 2012, and I specialized in the single audit. Okay, so I've been through the ringer. I've audited higher education, state and local governments, tribal organization, large nonprofits. Okay, so if I don't know it, I can find it. All right, we also have a great OCFO, Customer Service Center. Our guy there, he's like a closeout expert and loves to talk. He loves to talk. So please feel free to reach out at any time. Okay, and if you have specific questions for your program, talk to your program manager. because that's what I might tell you to. Okay. And check your terms and conditions of your award. All right. And then no question is a bad question. I promise you. If you ask a question, we will not suspend you from grants forever because the question was bad. I might judge you internally. All right. But it is okay. You can ask any question that's on your mind. So any last words? Checking the chat. Let's see. What about the different grants with the same subawardee and the total amounts in a year combined? If it's different grants, it doesn't matter. So it's by the subaward. Okay, so if it's one subaward and whatever happens with that particular subaward, that goes with FAFATA. Is FAFATA required? I answered that one. Don't think about if it's a state entity. Think about if you're a prime, because I just showed you a state, and states get findings too. Okay. Yes, every single audit is public, right? So this is public information. If you just Google Federal Audit Clearinghouse, you can look up any entity that receives, including your own state that receives federal grants. Okay, so every single audit has to be published in the Federal Clearinghouse. So, and you can review those findings just by downloading the report. Download the report, it'll come right up. So you can see the survey code. Please feel free to judge me. Judge me accordingly. Yeah, do our survey, but let us know what you think. Anything that we can modify, add, subtract. Hey, this guy, I don't know why you chose that guy. Say all the things. And I'll take kudos as well. Okay, thanks for the training. Will we get the slide deck? Yes, we sent the slide deck out. Do sole source rules only apply to procurement contracts for goods and services? I said this earlier. So sole source does not is nothing in the CFR that says a subrecipient cannot be sole source. Nothing in the CFR that says that. All right, but it's something in the sole source for procurement. Okay, and this is another reason to make sure you differentiate whether you have a sub or a contractor, consultant, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, appreciate it. Thanks. What kinds of fees can contractors add? Indirect, de minimis, overhead. A contractor can pretty much add anything. You just have to make sure if it's part of your terms and conditions. Okay, is it allowable per the CFR? Like alcohol isn't allowable. All right, so double check those. If you look into the CFR 400s, you can see what's allowable, what's not allowable, like advertising and things like that. Okay. Is there a guide on how to report the FAFATA? Yes. If you go to the FAFATA website, www.sam.gov/FSRS, is videos on it. And they give you videos on how to put the information in the system, how the system works, the whole nine. How are the monitoring rules different for contractors compared to subs? Do they need to be reviewed the same way? No. If you go to our procurement guide, as well as if you look in the 2 CFR 200, if you look into like the 318s, I say from 318 to about 327, you will see some of the different procurement rules. So you, in a sense, you need to monitor both, right? But it's different things that you look for when you monitor. Like, for example, a contractor probably isn't going to do a FFR. Okay, or a contractor wouldn't necessarily have a programmatic report. They could, but they wouldn't necessarily. All right, so check your regulations. Thank you all. Thank you. You were great. Thank you. Great present. Appreciate it. Helpful. Thanks. Thank you. This recording will be available. The FAFATA should be suspended at the end of the grant award or fiscal year or based on. We talked about this. Now, when it comes to the FAFATA, it's about when you signed the contract. The FAFATA, let's say you signed it today, you have until the end of the next month from when you signed it. That's when it's supposed to be submitted. Okay, the end of the next month. All right. So in a sense, you can have 2 months to get your FAFATA done. Now, any other questions? Any last words? Okay, cool. And again, here's the survey right here. Please check the survey and let us know what you think. All right. I'm gonna check the chat one more time. Any last thoughts? Any last words? Well, thank you. Thank you all. I appreciate it. All right. Have a good one. Bye. Someone said, what if you make a mistake in a sub versus contractor determination? It's not about mistakes. It's about showing your work. If you show your work and you document, okay, you have something to hold you up. Because at the end of the day, if it's judgment versus judgment, who has the most documentation and who showed the most work? When it comes to grant, it's not always about right and wrong. It's about showing your work and document. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all.